There are nights that change you forever. Nights that leave scars, not on your body, but on your soul. Diddy's Black Party was one of those nights. Everyone knows the legend. A single event so shrouded in secrecy, it became a ghost story. No photos, no witnesses brave enough to speak, and no second party. Until now. When Evan told me we were invited, I should have said no. Something about it didn't feel right, but I went. And what I saw that night was nothing short of a nightmare. This wasn't a party. It was something darker, something alive. The air pulsed with whispers, the shadows moved on their own, and the laughter in the room felt hollow, forced. And then I saw it. Not just Diddy, but the presence behind him. A demon so ancient and vile, its very existence made the room feel colder, smaller, suffocating. Its eyes burned into me, its form too horrifying to fully describe. And in that moment, I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same. This is the story of the most terrifying night of my life. The night I met Diddy's demon. Some nights stay with you forever. Diddy's infamous Black Party was one of those nights. Everyone had heard the whispers. A single event years ago that no one dared to discuss. Unlike his legendary white parties, where the champagne flowed and every celebrity under the sun made an appearance, the Black Party was different. This wasn't a celebration of glamour or wealth. It was something darker. Something that existed in the shadows. No photos, no videos, no proof of what happened. Just silence and the chilling warning, there's only ever been one. That's why, when Evan called me and said we'd been invited to another Black Party, I thought he was joking. "You're serious?" I asked, gripping the phone. "There's no way. That was a one-time thing. Even if it did happen, why would we get invited?" Evan's voice buzzed with excitement, almost manic. "I'm telling you, this is it. My friend hooked us up. This is the party that makes people. You don't ask questions, you show up. Deals get made here. Careers are launched." "You sure this is legit?" I asked, doubt gnawing at me. "It's real, man. This is the big break we've been waiting for," he said with that unshakable confidence that always dragged me into trouble. "I need you to trust me." Evan had always been a dreamer, the type to chase impossible highs while I stuck to the safety of predictability. But deep down, I envied him. Against my better judgment, I sighed and said, "Fine, I'm in." The mansion appeared at the end of the road like a mirage, its glass and steel exterior reflecting the dim light of the moon. Golden lights illuminated its sharp edges, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the ground. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, sleek sports cars, and polished black SUVs that seemed to hum with quiet power. Our beat-up sedan felt embarrassingly out of place, but Evan didn't seem to care. He hopped out with a grin, straightening his jacket like he belonged there. "Damn," he said, looking up at the towering structure. "This is next level." Inside, the air hit me like a wall. Warm and heavy, it carried a faint metallic scent that lingered just beneath the surface. The music thudded softly, a low, pulsing bass that seemed to vibrate through the walls. The guests were like something out of a dream. Celebrities, influencers, and power players moved through the room with an almost ethereal grace. Their laughter was soft, musical, but there was something hollow about it. Their movements felt choreographed, their smiles too perfect, their eyes too empty. Evan vanished almost immediately, drawn to a group of women who looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. I stayed back, hugging the edges of the room and nursing a drink I didn't plan to finish. Diddy's parties were legendary, especially his annual white parties. Everyone knew the drill. Pristine white outfits, champagne flutes glinting in the light, and every celebrity dressed to the nines. The uniformity of the white clothing gave those events an almost heavenly feel, an illusion of purity and perfection in a world built on opulence. But the Black Party? It was nothing like that. The moment I stepped into the grand hall, I realized the dress code wasn't just different, it was unsettling. There were no rules, no monochromatic elegance. Instead, the guests were draped in a kaleidoscope of shimmering fabrics, sharp angles, and skin. A woman in a crimson gown moved past me, the dress clinging to her like molten lava. Her back was bare, exposing intricate tattoos that slithered across her skin like they were alive. Men wore tailored suits, some vibrant, some dark, but all impossibly sleek and sharp. Others opted for elaborate costumes that looked like they belonged in an avant-garde theater production. A man in a gold cape and black leather pants strode through the room, his eyes hidden behind a mask of glittering crystals. And then there was the skimpiness. Most of the women, and some of the men, wore outfits that barely covered them. Dresses slashed high up the thigh, necklines plunging past reason, metallic body paint glinting under the chandeliers. It wasn't sexy, it was unnerving. Like they were trying to showcase themselves not as people, but as offerings. What the hell is this? I muttered under my breath, shrinking into a corner. Even Evan, who usually thrived in chaotic party scenes, looked uneasy. He tugged at the collar of his black jacket, his eyes darting around the room. It's different, huh? That's one word for it, I said, gripping my drink. The air was heavy, almost metallic, and I could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching me, even when no one was looking directly. The stark difference between Diddy's polished white parties and this unrestrained spectacle wasn't lost on me. Those parties were about control, image, and curated perfection. This was raw, chaotic, and wild. A celebration of something much darker, and everyone in the room seemed to know it. As I wandered, I started to notice things. The mirrors in the hallway reflected the room behind me. But when I moved closer, my reflection seemed delayed, lagging just enough to make my stomach churn. The chandeliers overhead flickered faintly, their golden light casting shifting shadows across the marble floor. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but the shadows seemed to move independently, stretching and twisting in ways that didn't make sense. And then there were the women. They were beautiful, too beautiful. They moved in clusters, their dresses shimmering like liquid gold. Their features were flawless, but identical, and their eyes were cold and empty, as though something vital had been stripped away. One of them brushed past me, her hand grazing mine. Her skin was ice cold, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something flicker behind her eyes. A plea, a warning. "Help," she whispered, so softly I almost missed it. By midnight, the atmosphere in the mansion had changed completely. The music slowed, the chatter softened, and the air grew heavier. The guests began to move as if in a trance, drawn toward the grand hall at the center of the house. I followed reluctantly, my heart pounding as I tried to find Evan. The chandeliers above us dimmed, casting long, jagged shadows across the walls. And then I saw Diddy. He stood beneath the largest chandelier, dressed in a pristine white suit that glowed faintly under the golden light. But something about him was off. His posture was loose, almost slouched, his shoulders slightly hunched. His eyes were bloodshot, unfocused, the pupils wide and glassy as though he were on something strong. He swayed faintly as he raised a glass in one hand. A smile plastered across his face that didn't reach his eyes. The confident, commanding figure I'd seen on TV wasn't there. In his place was someone hollow. His movements were sluggish, deliberate, like a marionette on strings. "It's him," Evan whispered beside me, his voice trembling. "Yeah," I said, though my throat felt tight, the word barely escaping. "Does he seem right to you?" Evan didn't answer, and I couldn't blame him. Something about Diddy's presence felt wrong, unnatural, like he wasn't entirely in control of himself. "Ladies and gentlemen," Diddy said, his voice smooth but slow, his words slurred ever so slightly. "Thank you for joining me tonight. It's time." The crowd erupted into applause, but it wasn't joyous. The sound was mechanical, robotic, as if the people clapping weren't doing it by choice. A chill ran down my spine as I looked around at their faces. They were smiling, but their eyes were dead. The room suddenly felt suffocating, the air thick with a metallic tang I could taste at the back of my throat. The whispers began then, soft and indistinct, like static at the edge of my hearing. I didn't want to be there anymore. I didn't want to know what was coming next. Diddy raised a glass, a wide grin spreading across his face, though it still didn't reach his glassy, bloodshot eyes. "Before we begin," he said, his voice slurred yet commanding, "a toast, a special drink for a special night." At his signal, servers emerged from the shadows, carrying trays of crystal shot glasses filled with a dark, iridescent liquid. It shimmered faintly under the dim lights, the color shifting between black and deep purple as though it were alive. The trays moved through the crowd, and each guest eagerly grabbed a glass. The energy in the room shifted, anticipation mingling with something darker. The whispers that had been faint at the edges of my mind grew louder, wrapping around me like a physical weight. Evan grabbed a glass without hesitation, his eyes alight with nervous excitement. "This is it," he whispered, turning to me with a shaky grin. "This is what makes it all worth it." I stared at the glass the server offered me, my stomach twisting in knots. The liquid seemed to pulse faintly like it was breathing. "Take it," the server said, their voice low and insistent. "I'm good," I said, raising my hands in a gesture of refusal. The server hesitated, their expression unreadable, before moving on. Evan shot me a look, part disbelief, part disappointment. But he didn't press the issue. He tipped the glass back and downed the liquid in one quick motion, his face contorting briefly at the taste. All around me, guests were drinking, their movements synchronized like they were part of some silent, rehearsed choreography. As soon as the last glass was emptied, the air in the room seemed to shift. It was subtle at first, like the pressure had changed, but it quickly became suffocating, almost unbearable. And then it happened. The women began to undress. It wasn't hesitant or bashful, it was deliberate, ritualistic. They moved in unison, their hands pulling at zippers and buttons, their shimmering dresses falling to the floor in a cascade of fabric. One by one, they stood exposed, their bodies adorned with intricate markings that glowed faintly in the dim light. "What the hell is happening?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. Evan didn't answer. He was staring at the scene, his expression blank, his body rigid. The whispers grew louder, now clearly coming from the walls, the floor, the air itself. The markings on the women's bodies pulsed with light, their patterns shifting and twisting like living things. Diddy stepped forward, his movement still slow, deliberate, as if he were under some unseen influence. "This," he said, his voice reverberating through the room, "is how we honor the night." The women's bodies began to sway, their movements synchronized as they formed a circle at the center of the room. The air crackled with energy, the light from the markings casting strange, shifting shadows across the walls. I took a step back, my legs trembling, my breath shallow. This wasn't a party. It was a ritual. And whatever it was building toward, I wanted no part of it. The air in the grand hall thickened as the chanting started. It was Diddy, his voice sharp and guttural, tearing through the unnatural silence that had fallen over the crowd. He was the center of it all, standing in his pristine white suit now stained with spilled liquor, his arms outstretched, his head thrown back in ecstasy. The chant was alien, the words a language I couldn't place but felt deep in my bones. The guests responded in kind, their laughter and cheers rising in tandem with Diddy's voice. They weren't just watching, they were reveling in it, their faces twisted into grotesque parodies of joy. Diddy grabbed a bottle of liquor from a tray, a dark liquid that seemed to glint unnaturally in the flickering light. He moved to the women in the circle, pouring it over their bare bodies, the alcohol glistening as it ran down their skin. The women writhed and arched, their movements unnatural, their glowing markings pulsing in time with Diddy's chant. Then the acts began. It wasn't sensual, it wasn't even human. The women turned to each other, their bodies tangling and twisting in ways that defied logic, their glowing markings flaring with each movement. It wasn't for pleasure, it was for power. The air vibrated with it, a thrumming energy that resonated through my chest like the pounding of a war drum. The chanting grew louder, faster, the rhythm escalating until it felt like the room itself was alive, pulsing with the beat of a monstrous heart. Diddy dropped to his knees, tears streaming down his face, his body trembling with what could only be described as joy. "You're here," he sobbed, his hands outstretched toward the towering figure. "You're finally here." He stood, raising his arms wide as if to embrace the entire room. His voice, trembling yet powerful, echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, behold," he declared, his face alight with ecstasy. The crowd erupted into cheers, their applause deafening, their faces stretched into grotesque expressions of awe and reverence. The energy in the room surged, the golden lines of the pentagram flaring brighter, the molten cracks in the floor spreading outward. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I had no idea who or what this creature truly was, but its name sent a shiver down my spine. The whispers in the room seemed to take up the name, repeating it in a soft, hypnotic chant. The demon's gaze swept over the crowd, its burning eyes lingering on each person, as though it were weighing their worth. And then it looked at me. The air around me grew impossibly heavy, the temperature plummeting, until frost began to creep across the marble floor beneath my feet. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, weaving together into a single, booming voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am desire," it said, though its lips didn't move. Its voice wasn't spoken. It was in my head, resonating through my very being. "I am the hunger that drives men to ruin, the flame that consumes all who draw near. I am the king of what lies hidden, the master of lust, the corrupter of flesh and soul." Its massive hand, ending in claws sharper than any blade, gestured toward the glowing markings on the floor. "They summon me for their pleasure, for their gain. But I am not bound to them. I exist for myself, and I take what I am owed." His voice, though silent to the ears, thundered within every mind. "I am Asmodeus, the king of lust, the prince of desire. Tonight, you stand in the presence of true power." His proclamation echoed in my head, drowning out everything else, the whispers, the chanting, even my own racing thoughts. His words were not just a statement, but a declaration of dominion, an undeniable truth that burned itself into my soul. Diddy, his face flushed with a mixture of fear and joy, nodded furiously. "Yes, my lord, I understand. Everything I've done has been for you." His words tumbled over one another as he prostrated himself before the towering figure. "The women, the rituals, they've all been for your glory." The crowd cheered again, their applause ringing hollow, but I couldn't join them. My stomach churned as the truth clicked into place. The trafficking, the women brought here against their will, it had all been for this. Diddy wasn't just a criminal, he was a servant, a pawn of something far greater and far darker than I could have imagined. I didn't wait for the aftermath. My chest burned, the mark on my skin searing with a heat that felt alive. I turned to Evan, grabbing his arm. "We're leaving," I said, my voice trembling. He didn't move. His glassy eyes were fixed on the empty pentagram, his lips still murmuring fragments of the chant. "Evan," I shouted, shaking him, "snap out of it." He blinked, his eyes clearing slightly, but the glow of Asmodeus's influence lingered. I can't," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Yes, you can," I insisted, dragging him toward the door. My legs felt like lead, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I didn't look back at the guests, at Diddy, or at the scorched floor. I didn't want to see if the demon had truly gone. As we stepped into the cool night air, I thought we were free. The mansion loomed behind us, its towering structure now suffocating rather than grand. But then I saw them. The driveway stretched before us, lined with sleek black SUVs, their engines idling in the dark, and standing in a perfect line beside them were more women. There had to be dozens of them, all dressed in gowns of shimmering gold, their bodies adorned with the same glowing markings I had seen on the women inside. They stood perfectly still, their faces blank, their eyes empty. My blood ran cold as I realized they weren't waiting to be rescued. They weren't victims, not anymore. They were offerings. Evan stopped in his tracks, his breath hitching as he stared at the line of women. They want him," he muttered, his voice barely audible. The women's heads turned in unison, their glowing eyes locking onto us. One of them stepped forward, her movements fluid, unnatural. She reached out a hand, her lips parting to speak, but no sound came out. "Keep walking," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Evan didn't move. He stared at her, his body trembling. "They're beautiful," he murmured, his voice filled with a twisted reverence. "No," I said, grabbing his arm again. "They're not. They're wrong." The woman tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing as if she could hear me. A faint smile crossed her lips, but it was hollow, lifeless. She stepped closer, and the others followed, their movements synchronized like a single organism. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I pulled Evan with all my strength, dragging him toward the car. The air around us grew colder, the whispers returning, louder than ever, wrapping around us like chains. The Black Party wasn't just an isolated event. It was a microcosm of the system we live in, a reflection of the power dynamics that shape our world. The people at the top, the ones we idolize and admire, aren't there by chance. They've made deals. They've paid their price. And the rest of us, we're the fuel. Every dollar we spend, every like we give, every time we look the other way, we're feeding the machine. We're keeping it alive. I didn't understand that before the party. But now, I can't unsee it. I can't unhear the whispers. Even now, weeks later, the mark hasn't faded. It's a constant reminder of that night, of the choices I made and the things I witnessed. The lines have grown darker, spreading across my chest like veins, pulsing faintly in the darkness. The whispers follow me everywhere. They grow louder at night, their voices weaving into my thoughts, my dreams, my every waking moment. They speak in a language I can't understand, but their meaning is clear. I haven't seen Evan since. I don't know if he's alive or if he's something else now. But I know one thing. The demon's mark isn't just a curse. It's a claim. I wish I could tell you this story has a happy ending. I wish I could tell you I saved those women, that I exposed the truth and brought the people responsible to justice. But I didn't. The truth is, the system is too big, too powerful, and we, as a society, are part of it. Every time we idolize these celebrities, every time we ignore the red flags, every time we brush off the whispers and rumors, we feed the machine. We allow this to happen. The Black Party isn't just Diddy's freak off. It's everywhere. The actors, the athletes, the corporations, they all have their own version. And the worst part, we celebrate them. We glorify them. We let them continue. But it doesn't have to be this way. If you're still listening, I'm begging you, do something. Talk about this. Share this. Protect the ones who can't protect themselves. The women, the children, the ones who don't have a voice. Because if we don't, this will never stop. Like, share, subscribe. Not for me, but for them. For the ones who never made it out. And for the ones who still might.